Hiring managers of Reddit, what was your most WTF is wrong with this person moment you've had during an interview? I once had a candidate for an intermediate level analyst brag during an interview that he used to work other jobs and play poker while working his primary office job. For example, for about 2 weeks before he was caught and got fired from both jobs. He would take long lunches. No one knew where he went between 10:30 and 1:30. Turns out he had gotten a job making pizzas at the next door pizza restaurant and worked the lunch rush. He also bragged about playing poker at work constantly. This was in the late 2000s, while online poker was still in its boom. He bragged these things to me as if I, a relatively young professional at the time, would think he was cool. Or maybe he thought it demonstrated his ability to multitask and still get his job done. I have no idea. Either way, we did not extend him an offer. Okay, I also would not have hired this guy, but at the same time, if you give me and my 3 cohorts all the same work, they'll somehow take 14 hours to do what I'll have done, and done correctly in 2, and I really wish that was something that benefited me somehow, so I kind of applaud the guy for getting it done, and then finding some way to spend his time. Me, I see you manage a vegetarian restaurant. Interviewee, what? It says here you manage a vegetarian restaurant. I guess I did write that. Not really though. My girlfriend had an art exhibition, and I organized the sandwiches for the opening. They were vegetarian. This was a candidate that was otherwise pretty impressive seeming, and had been among the favorites for a quite sought after position. The interview had even gone quite well up until this point. Met him later at a party. He had no memory of me. This kid, probably 18-20, started picking his nose, like knuckle deep and digging for gold in the middle of his food service job interview. Wrapped that up real quick and didn't hire him. I interviewed a gal once, and while we were talking, I was looking over her resume. Please note that English is her first language or else this wouldn't have humored me so much. Her mission statement on her resume was as follows. Along with my detail-oriented and organizational skills, I will encourage team to work cooperatively and creativity to provide an understanding the visual aspects of our work. This was for an admin position at a law firm. Not sure what the visual aspects of our work entailed in this position. Honestly, I read it over about 5 or 6 times, worried that I was having a stroke, so I didn't really hear much of anything she said during the interview. I haven't been able to make sense of it no matter how many times I read it. I actually cut it out of her resume and have it sitting on my desk some 15 years later. TLDR. She was a lazy liar. Hiring a business intelligence analyst. There are a variety of ways to get into this profession. I'm open to many of them. Frankly, if you have a good head on your shoulders and know even basic SQL, I can probably work with you, though lately I've had to get more picky as our projects have become more complex. This woman is mid-40s, boisterous personality, and seems like she'd be a good organizational fit. The problem is she keeps lying, but only halfway. Do you know SQL? Oh yes, I have years of experience with it. Great, so take a look at this code. This is the sort of thing we do. What's this? For some reason, though, the most egregious lie that stands out in my head with her was when she commented, when I suggested she not take a particular route to the train station because it was dark and potentially unsafe. Also, I was headed to the same station and did not wish to commute with her, that she had a black belt and had practiced martial arts for years. Oh, cool. What discipline? I don't remember. FFS. Pathological liars are a trip. She's long since gone, but we had one where I work. She had stories about how she was dating a pro sports player, had dated some pop music star, had a massive cattle ranch, had a 6-figure second job, etc. She'd get P if you expressed any kind of disbelief. Hiring for a senior dev position. Had a telephone interview and she seemed confident and competent, so I flew her down for an on-site interview. She calls not me but the front desk reception and says she can't drive in a big city and needs a car to pick her up, and she refuses to get the rental car we reserved. Before Uber Lyft. Call is transferred to me and I tell her to take the train. Atlanta. Marta. No, she says. Too scary. I tell her to go to the taxi stand and take that. Nope, afraid of taxis. She wants a court limo to pick her up and nothing else will do. She is adamant. I put her on hold, Have a chat with my boss who says just send her home. She's too much work if she can't even handle this. I tell her thank you for taking the time to fly down, but not even our own VPs get that treatment, and to go ahead and change your ticket to fly home now. She then starts telling me she will take a taxi, etc. I said please don't bother, it will be a waste of everyone's time. Thank you. Goodbye. Not once when setting up her travel plans did she say she needed assistance getting from the airport. It was explained to her she would pick up a rental car at the airport. She was fine with it. No idea WTF she was thinking, but ain't nobody got time for that nonsense. We had a shortlisted candidate come for a campus interview. This usually includes meeting with the dean, a long interview with the full hiring committee, a formal meeting with the department chair, dinner with the hiring committee, a formal job talk, 1-hour academic lecture, teaching a sample undergrad course, and meeting some students, as well as a campus tour. During the job talk, he kept flashing the pink satin liner of his suit jacket in the direction of one of our openly gay grad students. Everyone noticed. Later, he proceeded to get trashed during the meet greet with the students at a local bar and confided all of the dirt about his current department and overshared the status of his rocky relationship with a grad student back at his home university. A big no-no, even though it happens sometimes. The next morning sealed the big fat no. A grad student usually volunteers, and is compensated, to drive the candidate back to the airport. This person kept trying to persuade the openly gay grad student to drive him instead, even though another student, female, already had the task assigned to her. He didn't get an offer. No. I cringed the whole time reading that. I have heard similar horror stories from tenured professors at my university. Candidates must be on their best behavior for the entire 48 hours because employees are determining if they are a good fit for the department. When she listed all of her ex-boyfriends that currently worked there, and said she couldn't wait to see the look on their faces when she showed up to work. This was in the first 3 minutes of the interview, so I wasn't even close to offering the job yet. I cut the interview right there and sent her on her way. This was about 3 weeks ago. We had a woman who works at the generic retail big box store across town wanting to transfer to our store of the same name because it's closer to her house. She showed up for the interview wearing a faded shirt from a local redneck bar, complete with rebel flag, cut-off jeans, and flip-flops. During the interview she proceeded to talk crap about 6 different managers associates by name from her current store. She cussed during the interview, and kept telling us more and more about the people she didn't like. Do people not realize that if we hear them talking crap about them, that we know she'll do it to us too, and at least dress for an interview? Nope, they don't realize it, because their brains can't think more than 0 steps ahead. I set up an interview for an acquaintance's nephew with a company looking to hire 30 college students for summer work. The nephew's major and the line of work this company performed seemed to mesh perfectly, and I knew the hiring manager personally, so it seemed like a great fit. A couple weeks later the acquaintance emails asking about the job, so I hit up my hiring manager friend and the conversation went something like this. Me: hey, how'd the round of hiring go? HR: great. Needed to fill 30 spaces and only had to do 31 interviews to fill them. Me: oh cool, so was Paul X one of them? HR: oh him. Yeah well, UHH. He was naked during the interview so we declined. Me: what? Are you serious? I find it hard to believe he would show up to an interview nude. HR: well, it was a Skype interview, and when we brought up his video feed he was laying in bed nude. Me: oh, well maybe he thought you couldn't see him. Maybe he thought it was just an audio meeting. HR: we told him we could see him and he said sorry, then covered up with a sheet. We asked if he wanted to reschedule and he said no, he was good. So yeah, we decided to pass. Sorry Paul. I've had 2 separate cases where people were so confident that they had a job that they botched the interview. On one of these, I wanted to tell the candidate to go out and come back in again, because he was one of 2 very good choices and his arrogance put my team off. They thought the other candidate would be a better fit. I was performing a video interview with a candidate. They were clearly in a large bedroom, with most of it visible in the background, but it was clean so I didn't mind. In the back right corner was a closed door. About 7 minutes into the interview I see the door open slightly and some dude poke his head in. See that his roommate girlfriend was in an interview, then close the door. Not a big deal, it happens. I ask my next question and let the candidate respond. But then, about 30 seconds later I see the door slowly open again, only this time the dude comes crawling out the bottom. He continues to crawl across the floor, making his way to the opposite side of the room. I assume he thought he was out of the camera's FOV, but he was clearly visible. He gets to the far end of the room and turns to fiddle with something but in the air facing the camera. Finally, he finishes up with whatever he was doing and makes his way back and out the door. I know I should have stopped the candidate and had her deal with the dude, but it was so funny to watch I had to let it play out. I could barely contain my laughter, and after the interview finished I lost it. She got a job though, and from what I remember was a great employee. Hiring for a customer support role. Explained to candidate on pre-interview email how she would need to sign in at our reception kiosk and register herself. Get name tag sorted. Then the hiring manager, me, would be informed and would come out to the lobby to get her. 15 minutes before interview time, I hear a god almighty jangly noise and see a woman repeatedly trying to open the locked door, and at one point, uses her hands to beat the door and wave at people inside. I open the office door, ask her how we can help. Find out she's the candidate when meant to interview and she never read instructions. She lost out on the role there and then, but we still met with her for about 10 minutes. We interviewed 3 other people that day and none had problems with interview etiquette. To start the interview, I asked him to tell us, 3 people, a little bit about himself. 35 minutes later, he stopped talking. Usually people answer this question in 5 minutes. It was incredibly awkward and I was tempted to interrupt him, but then truly wanted to see how long he would go. Okay, great, now tell us a lot about yourself. We have a very simple pre-employment test. If you have been in our industry for more than a year you should get 100%. Sometimes we even give it as an at-home test. We had one guy that took his test home, had it for over a week. He brought it to the formal interview and got 90% of the questions wrong. Even though according to his resume he was an all-star and knew everything. He had an excuse for every wrong answer to even the most widely known questions in our industry. It would be the equivalent of saying you have been laying sod for 20 years, and then put the green side down. He didn't get the job. I did a phone interview with a guy and he seemed really excited and very friendly. He seemed to be relatively new to the field, but we were willing to give him a chance. I invited him to come in for an in-person interview. My manager and I were doing this second interview, and when I called him in, he gave me a huge hug and proceeded to talk to me like I was his best friend. As a 27-year-old woman, I was incredibly uncomfortable and froze up. At the end of the interview, we told him we would reach out to him within the next couple of weeks to let him know the outcome. After the interview, my manager asked if I knew him, and I said I definitely did not. His interview was not great either, and he was not a good fit for the job. My manager was the one who had to call him to let him know he didn't get the job. However, he proceeded to call my phone every day that week and left me long voicemails. Most of the times he'd ask about his interview, but sometimes he'd say things like, "Hey girl, how are things going? I was thinking, if I get hired we should hang out." It freaked me out, and I had my manager call him early to give him the news that he did not get the job. The calls did not stop, and I just kept deleting his voicemails without listening. My manager and I were so disturbed by his persistence that we went to HR for help, and they must have done something because the calls stopped after that. Oh my god, that is legit disturbing. You must have a great HR department. They can be like wizards getting people to chill out. Not a manager, but I was the interviewee. I wasn't feeling well that morning, but I had an interview with a super cool science museum as a promotions event coordinator. It would have been the perfect job. I decided to go anyways. As I drove to the interview, I felt horrible. When I went inside I was feeling worse. I was asked to sit and wait for the hiring manager to come get me. When she finally did I knew I had made a mistake in coming. I got up and followed her across the whole museum and up 2 flights of stairs. It felt like it was 120 degrees in there. And finally, as we were walking toward her office and she reached for the door handle, my stomach let go. I barely made it to the trash can right next to me and proceeded to vomit for a good 2 minutes, even dry heaving a few times. When I was finished, I looked up and she had her back to me with her head in her hands like she was trying to hold it together. I said I was sorry and I hope she had a better day than me, and I turned around and left. Man, that would have been a fun job. Probably could have just told them when you first arrived. It shows that you are super serious, and I would have just rescheduled with you or made it more convenient. Hiring for an apartment building doorman. He kept telling me that he was just on the phone with Hong Kong putting together a currency exchange transaction and that he was working in another big thing in China. He asked me to wait a few minutes while he finished typing an email. Told me that he's always on the phone. Was not hired. Ha 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 ha. It sounds like a lot of these are coming from interviewees who think making a power play is how you approach an interview. I have 2 stories. The first is back in college days. We were interviewing for a new college newspaper reporter. The question was, this position requires an energetic, inquisitive and outgoing person who can chase a story and get the facts. With that in mind, how would you describe yourself? The answer was up. Fun. Care to elaborate on that? Number. They did not get the position. The second one was for an IT position in my later career. An individual that had been fired from one branch of a government agency decided to apply for another branch a few years later, but his resume read very much differently than the reality. Instead of him being fired for essentially not knowing how to do his primary job function, he was now let go when the project closed 3 years after he was fired. Also, all his resume achievements listed for that time were things either myself or one of my co-workers had accomplished. Things that he didn't even have any involvement with. I guess he didn't realize we were on the hiring panel because we had merged with another region. I honestly don't fathom how he thought that was going to work out, because it was the same agency and it's not like we wouldn't have noticed. I was on the interview board for a forensic technician position, aka CSI. The interview process was a series of questions, and we give the applicants a photograph from a crime scene and ask them to write down everything they observe and what they believe is important. We always informed the applicants of the process before we begin in case there are any questions issues. We would also go over the job description again just in case there are any questions about the duties of the position. We had a qualified applicant and her application clearly suggested she understood what being a forensic technician involved. We did our standard review before beginning the interview and she said she understood and was eager to begin. We got to the part where we present the photograph and she freaked out. It was a photograph of a deceased male from a heroin overdose, so there was no blood but a bit of vomit. You could not fully see his face in the photograph. Nothing too graphic. She freaked out and asked if the photograph was real. We told her yes. This was a photograph from a scene within our jurisdiction that our team had responded to. She dropped the photograph on the table and said it's too disgusting and how could we show her something like that. We reminded her of the duties of the position and she said, well, I didn't think I would actually have to see something like that. It's not like that on TV. All of us on the interview board nodded at each other and I advised her the interview was over and thank you for coming in. I put out my hand to shake hers and she grabbed my hand with both of hers, begging me to let her continue because she really needs a job. I reminded her of the duties of a forensic technician and that if she could not do this most simple of tasks, there was no way we could consider offering her a position. She left. About 2 weeks later, she had received the thank you, but no thank you letter from our HR department. She called, gets transferred to me and asks why we didn't hire her. I reminded her that she herself stated in the interview she couldn't perform the duties of the job and she tells me she's changed. Can I give her a chance? She told me she binge watched Forensic Files and she was ready now. She cried 3 times during the interview about how much she hated her current job. My co-worker had to get up and grab a box of tissues for her. When she finally calmed down, she informed us that she'll need a special desk chair due to an injury she sustained at her current job. And yes, she did have a workers' compensation court case against said job and she hoped to win big. No one had said anything about hiring her. She just made an assumption that she got the job, I guess. The icing on the cake was that she was interviewing for a workers' compensation job at a firm where we only represent employers, never injured people. While that doesn't influence hiring decisions, talking at length about her current case against her boss was just a weird thing to bring up. That and crying. I'm pretty well acquainted with employment and comp law. She didn't get turned down because she had a comp case. Crying 3 times, believe it or not, did the trick for taking her off the callback list. I felt really bad for her, but dude, you can't do that in an interview. Didn't even make it to the interview process. I manage a restaurant and scheduled a 17-year-old girl for an interview first thing in the morning. As I was getting my paperwork ready, a man in his 20s, who I assumed was a customer, walked in the door. He asked if we were hiring and I said yes. I decided to go through the process quickly and ask him questions and whatnot as fast as possible. Keeping the story short, he had just moved to the area 2 weeks ago and was just looking for a real easy job where he could check out the hotties that get hired in restaurants during summer break. You know what I'm saying, bro, and tried fist bumping me. After politely declining the fist bump, I said he could go to our website and apply there and I would take his contact information now so I would remember him when I saw his application. He wrote his contact information, including several ways to find him on social media and his social security number. I thanked him and began walking to the office to finish what I was doing and store his information so if I ever saw him apply online I would know to immediately delete it. As I'm walking away, he turns to the 17-year-old interviewee and says, "Sup baby, what are you up to? Doing anything later?" I threw his info into the office and went back to the girl and interrupted him, even more aggressively hitting on her. I said she could have a seat at one of the tables and turned to the guy and said, "Thank you for coming in, but I have an interview to conduct." He left. I hired the girl and she's one of best workers I've hired, and I never saw him again. I hire student university workers. One of my questions is, tell me about a time at work where you made a mistake and how you fixed it. This kid had no prior work experience, so I modified the question to remove the at work part. I thought he'd tell me about freaking up at school or at home, and no. He told me about the time where he ripped his pants in gym class in the 4th grade. He didn't tell me how he fixed the situation either, so I'm assuming his pants are ripped to this day. This kid was a goldmine of what not to do in an interview. TBH, he did not get the job. TBH, I'm always torn on stories like this. There's a distinction between an answer showing he'd be a bad fit for the job and an answer showing he's bad at interviewing for jobs. Rambling about ripped pants falls firmly in the second category. Imo. Not a hiring manager, but interviewed an older guy to replace our sysadmin. He had to fax me his resume because he couldn't figure out how to attach it in an email. That kind of stuff is unfortunate. He was probably making bank handling antiquated systems, likely at a bank, until they finally upgraded and kicked him to the curb with the ancient machinery. Had a woman who, even before the interview, called about 3 times asking where we were located. She kept forgetting the address. Weird. The interview didn't go terribly. She was probably about in her 60s but physically fairly healthy, and although she spoke slowly you could tell she wasn't stupid and she really wanted the job. Security guard. Then when she gets to training class she was completely lost the whole time. She would interrupt the instructor, sit and look around during the tests, and occasionally talk to herself. My manager had to let her go in the middle of training and she was crying and refused to leave, so they had to escort her out. I think the poor woman must have been almost senile. She still applies from time to time and will call up asking where our office is as if she can't remember she'd ever been hired before. We've had to add notes to her profile to make sure she doesn't get offered an interview again. Could be dementia. Pretty standard symptom. I was interviewing a CDL driver candidate and this is how he explained his arrest for domestic violence. You know how Cherokee Indians get. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.